I've wondered with Paul being a Pharisee and their belief, from what I understand, in resurrection and the prophets, that
Yeah.
didn't actually aid him in his um, call when he started to follow Yeshua, Jesus, that because of that background of their belief in resurrection and the prophets, I could be off, but I feel like there was something in what his framework already that he realized, okay, this is it. This is the Messiah.
Alec, you have just hit on a point that is incredibly important. I have a whole chapter dedicated to this in my book. I think it's chapter two, um, in the book where I talk about how I kind of make the case that we would not know who Paul is if not for the fact that he was a Pharisee and that he saw the world both before and after his encounter with Jesus on the Damascus Road. He continued to identify as a Pharisee and to think like a Pharisee and to solve problems like a Pharisee. And everything you just said is is corroborates with the sources that we have about Pharisees. And again, there's a misconception that we've got all these sources, tons of sources about, Pharisees and what they believed and this and that. And sometimes people can maybe overcook what we really know about the Pharisees, but we do know some things about the Pharisees. Interestingly enough, the only Pharisee who's writing firsthand writing that we have is the
Mm.
Apostle Paul. He's the only Pharisee. Josephus, there's some debate about whether Josephus may have been a Pharisee, but there's
Mhm.
some it's a little gray as far as whether he was or wasn't. Paul, but is clearly identifies as a Pharisee.
Right.
And so, but the point is that yes, we can be confident the Pharisees believed in resurrection. They believed in the afterlife. They believed in very important. They were a Jewish group that believed in the authority of the Hebrew prophets. So
Hmm.
Paul, so much of the way he saw the world was through the lens of prophets like Isaiah, in particular, but others as well, because he quotes them like crazy in his letters, right? And so the
Yeah.
point is that and not just that, the Pharisees were also known as they had a very high standard of observance, but they were also very good and known for coming up with creative solutions, like solving halakhic or legal problems and being practical and how do we observe, this given commandment. And we see again they were creative, and it's interesting in the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's a reference to, we think the Dead Sea Scrolls is being critical of the Pharisees when they call the Pharisees seeker of smooth things or
Hmm.
seeker of smooth interpretations. In other words, it's like you can even see in that criticism that at least from the perspective of the Dead Sea Scrolls, Pharisees were like, they were creative in how they would try to come up with solutions based on the text. And we
Hmm.
see that in Paul from the standpoint of Paul was seeking to apply the principles and the mitzvot, the commandments of the Torah for a non-Jewish audience. And he was seeking to in many ways, Paul was a teacher of Torah for Gentiles. And so he was very clear, look, I'm not trying to turn you into Jews. I don't want you to get circumcised and become Jews, but I do want you to order your life according to God's commandments that are appropriate for you as non-Jews. And that was something that required innovation, and it was something that required creativity and certainly a sensitivity to, I mean, there's a whole spiritual side to that as well, but it was Paul's Pharisaic background, or I would say not, we have to be careful when we say background because it sounds like, he was that
Hmm.
he, that's what he used to be, right? And that's the way it's
Right.
typically framed. Paul used to be a Pharisee, but then he
Right.
converted and he became a Christian, right? I think that
Hmm.
that's a problematic, that's an problematic way of seeing Paul. I think he was a Pharisee till the day he died, and it was
Hmm.
that operating system that really positioned him well for his role as apostle and teacher of Torah to the Gentiles.